And it's interesting because I came from a background having gone to an Irish-speaking boarding school, but still having the general aura around the language of being sure, why would you want to learn that? There's no point in learning that. It's boring, it's mundane, the classes are rubbish, I'm never going to use it, why would I need it in any job? To then coming here and seeing the enthusiasm and the inspiration that people have for it, this was a new world for me, and I think it's a new world for a lot of people.
That's the vibrant voice of Vivian Sayers O'Callaghan, who's bringing Irish culture and language to the TikTok generation in New York City and all around the world. And I'm Martin Nutty.
Hey, and I'm John Lee. Welcome to the latest chapter in the Global Irish Nation conversation here on Irish Stew.
This episode is brought to you by the American Irish Historical Society, located on Fifth Avenue in New York City. With an extensive schedule of historical and cultural events hosted in a fabulous Gilded Age mansion, the American Irish Historical Society is building connections from the past into the future. Find out more about events at the American Irish Historical Society by visiting aihsny.org. That's aihsny.org.
Ireland, the US, the UK, Canada. Well, that's where most of you are now listening to our Global Irish Nation conversation. But maybe you're one of our listeners from France, Italy, Hungary, Australia, or New Zealand. Or could you be our one lone listener from Fiji? Wherever you are all very welcome to Irish Stew, where you've met artists, authors, academics, athletes, archaeologists, ambassadors, and even an astronaut. Martin Nutty, sounds like today we're meeting someone in a category all her own.
Absolutely, John. Great to be back on the Stew again. And our next guest is originally from Cork, but arrived in New York a little over a year ago. She is our first Gen Z guest, but has made her mark in both the worlds of business and social media. On arriving in New York, she spotted an opportunity to proselytize on behalf of her much-beloved Irish language, an Gaeilge. Using both TikTok and Instagram, she quickly developed a large following who consume her short, snappy, high-energy videos on the Irish language and Irish culture. By virtue of her social media following, she's become one of the most important influencers in Irish. We're delighted to welcome Vivienne Sayers O'Callaghan to Irish Stew. Welcome, Vivian.
Thank you very much. I do believe that is the most impressive introduction I've ever had. Thank you.
I was working really hard all night putting that together, you know.
Thank you. Now, do you know, I might be robbing that myself, actually. I appreciate it.
Yes, copying and repurposing our audio is more than welcome. But let's start off here. You're from a place called Carrignavar, which I understand is a village of around 500 or 600 people, about 5 or 6 miles north of Cork City, or, you know, if you want to do it new style, 10 kilometers. I believe the name Carrignavar means Rock of the Men.
That is exactly it.
That is, of course, as Gaeilge, right? And actually, it's interesting because the word in English, it sounds exactly the same way in Irish, which is kind of unusual. But tell us a little bit about that place.
Absolutely. Carrignavar. It's interesting when somebody asks me where I'm from. I usually start, well, I'm from Cork, but I'm also from Kerry. And I don't go any deeper than that because nobody ever knows where poor Carrignavar is. But it is a lovely small village with a small Irish-speaking population, interestingly enough. There was an Irish-speaking boarding school in the area, not the boarding school that I attended, however. And it is a typical Irish village with 3 pubs, a hairdresser, a church, of course, or a couple, and a lovely little shop. And I lived there with my family, our horses, our cattle, our dogs and cats. And Carrignavar has really, really deep history, actually. I think we have cannonballs and bullets back to the Cromwell times found in our fields. We also have Carrick-na-Bhar. I've done a bit of research into the name and I couldn't tell you why or how it's called that. But I do understand there's a tree in the middle of the village actually where 6 or 8 poets were hung for speaking and for producing content and poetry in the Irish language, actually. So it has a fascinating history.
So the moral of this story is if you're a poet, do not go to Carrick-na-Bhar.
There you go.
But just talking about your background, you have a double-barreled name, Vivian Sayers O'Callaghan. I don't know if the Sayers is kind of like a middle name or whether it's actually part of the surname or how that works. But the name Sayers is well known in Ireland for a particular reason. A much maligned name, and I believe you're actually related to Peg Sayers. Is that correct?
Peg Sayers of the Great Blasket Island, of course, back in West Kerry. As I mentioned a moment ago, I'm sort of from Cork and sort of from Kerry. The O'Callaghan would be from the Cork side, and the Sayers, of course, from the Kirkagreena, the Gaeltacht area of West Kerry. And yes, the big name, Peg Sayers.
Could I interrupt for a second? Because I am not from Ireland and I'm not familiar. That name doesn't resonate for me.
It doesn't with a lot of people, actually, yeah. And surprisingly, more and more, it seems to be slightly an older Irish population that are more familiar with her work. So it's interesting. Peg Sayers is a very famous author from the Great Blasket Island, out, off the Dingle Peninsula. And she's written a fantastic Shanachie, which would be a storyteller, an author. However, she didn't actually jot down the stories herself. A man came to the island and wrote down the stories for her. So it's often said that they're a little bit lost in translation. She was a funny, quirky, just fascinating human being, like many people are down from that part of the world. They're great, great storytellers, really deeply ingrained in the kind of the tradition and culture down there. So Peg Sayers, where to begin with her? I mean, it's Martin, do you have any interesting bits and pieces to say on her? She's just a mine of information.
Yeah, I'll go with the thing that sadly Peg Sayers is blamed by many for their distaste for the Irish language. And I've done, I am of that generation, as you remarked, that will be familiar with her because her autobiography was required reading in Irish when I was in high school for our American listeners, or secondary school in Ireland. And it's probably was not the best choice of book for teenagers to be reading. Now, the older self now realizes that this is an incredibly important cultural artifact from life in the Blasket Islands, 150 years ago. It's a really important book. And the other thing that I have read about her is that the book itself passed through, I believe her son actually wrote the book down. And then there was a second layer of editing added to the book to kind of squeeze out anything that was slightly ribald or naughty or fun-loving, because people that actually knew this woman said she was great crack. But the book itself is very kind of dour Catholic suffering on this horrible island off the west coast of Ireland. So I think that's my understanding of her story. But I think we have to probe your genealogy and find exactly how you line up with this poor, much maligned woman. And I understand that you can do a fairly good likeness of her,
Yes, indeed. And that kind of ties quite nicely, I guess, into what I'm trying to do at the moment. So, with my social media in particular, with the Irish language, many students and kids from a very young age, even primary school age, which would be middle school, I guess, and then even into high school age, all the way up to 17, was studying this book. It was a Peg's book. It was a mandatory piece of literature for the leaving certificate, so SAT equivalent, I guess. And it has now resulted in a large percentage of the population, when Peg's name is mentioned, oh my goodness, the woman that ruined my life. And there are these really, really intense, there's these terrible words and statements I could say too, but we won't go there. That I've heard from people, oh my God, that bitch ruined my life. That's what one person said to me before. And it's unfortunate, because that's what it was that was the mentality generated around the Irish language then. And learning Irish as you were growing up it was, Irish class, boring, mundane, and then you went and you read Peg. And it's now, what I'm trying to do with my social media is make it fun again, make it relevant again. And as a radio presenter strangely said to me recently, making Irish sexy again, which it is becoming, because the younger generation are becoming more interested in it, because we're making it more relevant to them. Can you imagine sitting down at 14 years of age and reading a book about an old lady on an island? What relevance does that have to me whatsoever? So I'm not going to listen to it or pay any attention to it whatsoever. But Martin, you're right. As I get older, I'm far more understanding of why this is so important. But we need to, get in touch with the younger generation, and kind of say, Irish is cool. And it's not only this, it's also fun, other things that's relevant to you.
Well, Viv, let's go back a little bit. You mentioned something, you mentioned a boarding school, not the one you went to. And I know you did go to a boarding school, and it sounds like an incredibly formative part of your life, both for the Irish language and for your sort of impetus to shoot for the stars.
Yes. At around the age of, I guess, 12 years of age, I walked into my mother and father's bedroom and I said, I want to go to boarding school, because my grandmother had gone to Coláiste Ida, it's called, down in Dingle, across the way. If you're standing in Dingle, you look across the bay, there's a magnificent 18th century, actually built in the 1800s, a Georgian yellow mansion that was lived in and owned by the man himself, Lord Ventry. So I said to my parents, I want to go here because my grandmother went here in the 50s, and they said, right, our child is just being delusional again. We'll let her at it for a couple of weeks. And no, I from that age, and I think even before that, I was always interested in the next big, ambitious, big step in my life. And that next big step was going to boarding school. So to tell you about boarding school, it is the only all Irish speaking Catholic all girls boarding school in Ireland. It is also, I believe, the cheapest boarding school in Ireland. It costs about 7,000 or 8,000 a year. And that is obviously a massive financial burden, but I am delighted and just so grateful every single day that I did go to boarding school. I was there until the age of 17 when I did my leaving cert, and then off to university in County Cork I went.
So I do share with you a boarding school education, interestingly. But my boarding school, like many Irish boarding schools, interestingly, has shut down. And I think maybe to many of our listeners now that certainly sounds like a 19th century experience, sending off a 12-year-old child, right, to boarding school. So talk to us a little bit about loneliness, the challenges associated with that, because that's a pretty big thing, when you're living away from home for the first time.
It is, you're right. Going there for the first year, it was great. It was an experience. I was living with about 100 to 120 other young girls. And when you're, if people have children who are listening, when we turn into a teenager, we go a little psychotic. So it was really entertaining. It was difficult, being away from your parents and having your phone for a limited amount of time every day. On a Tuesday and a Friday, we would get our mobile phone straight after school. But other days of the week, we'd get it for 20 minutes in the morning and then an hour or an hour and a half at night. So that lack of communication with the outside world was very difficult on us. And many of us had second phones. We had the Busca phone, the phone box, and we would give up a fake phone or a dupe phone just so we could keep in contact with our friends or our boyfriends or our friends from home and bits and pieces like that, So, but that's not to say that I'm absolutely delighted that they did take the phones from us, because at that age, you don't know what you're doing. You can't make right or wrong decisions. So in terms of the loneliness, then I have to say, weirdly, you can't relate with, because you are living in a school of 120 other girls. You're distracted every single second of the day. And I kind of blame it in a way for why I like being so busy now, is because the second you woke up in boarding school, you were going till 11 o'clock at night. You did not stop. It was go, go, go. It was prayers in the morning, classes, eating, back to classes, then you rugby, and then you were in the study hall from 5:20 every evening till 9 p.m. So you were going the whole time, which is why New York City might appeal to me as well, that constant, go, go, go. But the loneliness as well, back to kind of friendships and stuff. The amazing thing about it was the transition out of boarding school was beyond difficult for me, because I was after living with my bestest friends for 5 years. I was living in rooms with them. I was, playing sports with them. I was doing classes with them. And I got to know these people on a really deep level that no one else besides their family know them. And then I got into university and I said, oh, wow, you don't make these kind of connections with people in the real world. And it was difficult for me to understand that that boarding school friendship was a different level of friendship.
Well, Viv, you're lucky that the statute of limitations has run out at the school on your cell phone crime of having dupe phones and all that. So we appreciate your candor here, and I think you're safe from any further prosecution and extra study hall hours.
Absolutely.
I see a lot of energy and a lot of camaraderie, and it sounds like you were sort of inspired by the people who were around you then. And as you talk about next steps, I'm struck by the musical background that you have. You look at your LinkedIn profile, the banner images of you conducting an orchestra, which looks like about the coolest thing in the world. What happened during the more musical phase, and does it continue in what you're doing now?
Absolutely. So I began singing. So from a very, very young age, my parents put a violin into my hand, and the violin goes back far into my family. It skipped a couple of generations, but my grandparents, my great grandparents, brother, I believe, Garrett, used to make violins, Stradivarius model violins. And he used to go out onto the Navogue, which is the old Irish wooden boat to which they travelled out to the Blaskets in. Actually, you'd have people rowing. So they'd go out in the Navogue out in the sea or the lakes of Kerry, and they used to play trad music or the violins. So I ended up getting my hands on one of Garrett's violins, and I started playing it from a very young age, and I was really good at it, and then I just stopped, which was terrible. And whenever I see someone with a kid, I'm like, get them playing an instrument. I think it's the most valuable thing you can do. You can make money at it. It makes you happy. It makes you special. I just love music. And I got into boarding school. I said, I'm rubbish at this violin stuff. I don't know what it was, this sort of Irish lack of self-confidence of, I'm rubbish at everything. And it came in when I was about 10, 11, 12 years of age, or possibly even younger, unfortunately. So I dropped the violin, but I changed to being a mezzo-soprano instead, or a singer. My real love is in choral singing, ensemble singing. I love singing with people. And I like even speaking about this now and getting goosebumps, because I love making music with other people. Hence why you might have seen the conducting video of me too. I love working with other musicians. So, long story short, went to the Cork School of Music, which is now part of MTU, which is Munster Technological University, which is spread across Cork and Kerry. And I did a Bachelor of Music focusing on classical music and classical singing at performance. And in my final year, I was very fortunate to come over to Boston, study my final senior semester in Boston. And I kind of specialized more on my conducting rather than my singing then. So it's kind of evident in my life. I like taking something, I like getting good at it, and I like keeping it as a project and then moving on to the next big thing. So that's sort of what happened with my music. I then came to New York. I started singing at churches. I cantor at some churches, and I brought my best friend over as well, who's living in the same house as me, and she does opera singing and choral singing, conducting around the city as well. So that's how music still plays a large part in my life. And very little secret or big secret is that when I get my visa situation sorted, I'm really hoping to start an Irish choir of New York, because there is none. Yes.
Fantastic. And you know, I can hear, you know, the singing, there's vocal training that translates into how you speak and how you talk. And I think it's a real plus to your presentation. You have kind of musical quality in your voice. You have modulation, you have dynamics. So that's a great, and also I find, you know, I'm not an Irish speaker at all, but I find listening to it has a very musical feel to me. So I think that comes through as well.
Thank you.
Now, before we talk about your arrival in New York, and I should just pick up on one of the threads before we even go to this next bit, I'm oddly struck by, even though we're separated by a few generations, how our experiences have kind of lined up in a way, because my father was a violin maker and music was a very strong part of my family life. And another oddity is my family were in the plants business. And while you were in Cork, you set up a business which I believe was called Prickly Plants. So I'm finding it very odd, this conversation, in a very pleasant way. Just exactly, you know, how things lined up. So tell us about Prickly Plants.
That is beyond hilarious. Wow. Okay. The parallels there. So that was something I forgot to mention. There's a couple of things. So when I was in my second year of university studying my Bachelor of Music at the Cork School of Music, I got into this mindset again of, I'm good at this music stuff, but I want to do something even bigger. I want to equip myself with the skills in order to go out into the big, bad and beautiful world and sell myself as a musician, be able to market myself as a person or business or whatever I decide to pursue. So that brought me into importing houseplants from Holland and selling them online via Shopify. So I started an e-commerce business called Prickly Plants. And essentially, I was a mail order business that would ship houseplants to your house up in Dublin or down in Kerry. And I was about 18 when I started this. And boy, was it the most valuable thing I've ever done in my entire life. There's this terrible newspaper article on me, and it's fantastic. But I don't know where they took these words from, but I must have said them. It says, starting my own small business has been more valuable to me than 17 years in the Irish education system. I said, oh my goodness.
I understand that.
Yeah. I guess I was 18 and I was like, oh my goodness, school has been a scam. I've learned more than having my own business in a year than I ever have in any classroom. So it's really taught me the kind of value of practical, application and learning what you do in the classroom and going out into the world and doing that. So I then, I had Prickly Plants, and that sort of made me more comfortable with the social media as well. As I realized, I started my Instagram and I realized I was never going to sell a plant unless I sold myself too. That sounds a little weird. People buy people is what I'm trying to say, is that I need to get my face up in front of the customer and I need them to buy me and like me and enjoy me as a person in order for them to want to spend their money at my shop. So I made reels and videos and trying to tell them how wonderful and great all these plants were and how difficult they were, how to kill, even if they were easy to kill. But I had fun, telling people all about this new world that I was exploring. So that went really well. So I opened kind of a brick and mortar store then in Little Island, which is about 20 minutes east of Cork City. It's actually on the way to the Jameson Distillery in Middleton and various fun historical places along the way. And that is sort of kind of paved the way as well for my entrepreneurialism and sort of what I do now. I ended up doing some entrepreneur courses at Munster Technological University, where I won an award called the European Creative Futures. And it just, kind of snowballed since there. I'm 23 now, and when I started Prickly Plants, it only feels like a year ago. So much has happened since then. But I kind of have everything in my life to owe to Prickly Plants.
Gee, Viv, I was really starting to like you until you put it in my face here that you're 23 years old. Now I'm just really upset to hear that.
I just turned 23.
No, not kidding.
Yeah, I think it's a ugly age. It was so sad when I turned.
No, we talk about social media. I was interested to hear how it all began for you. Have you ever come across a guy named Gary Vaynerchuk on social media? It goes by Gary V.
I did. Would you believe? Yes. A couple of months ago, someone told me to follow him.
Yeah, he started off doing social media for his family wine shop in New Jersey. And he has turned this into an empire. He's an in-demand speaker now. He's got a very influential marketing company. He's like a go-to all-around social media guru and influencer. And it really just started to try to sell some more wine, give people the information they needed to get the right wine, that type of thing. And it just kept building from there. So maybe that's your future. Well, tell us about the learning curve. You started off with your plants, and now you're kind of coming over with brand Vivian here in New York. What were the early stages? What's the learning curve for you?
I think the learning curve with social media, there are so many, and it's very much throw it at the wall and see what sticks. It's very much that way. That's what happened to me with the plants too, is I threw myself into the deep end, perhaps a little too far. But you know what? I came out far stronger out the other end. And that's sort of what happened with the social media too. As I said, okay, I know I can make a video. It might be good or it might be rubbish. And weirdly enough, the ones that I seem to think are rubbish are the ones that do the best. So there are so many. You're learning every day with it. And it's interesting talking and kind of consulting people on the social media side of things. It's very much kind of an Irish mentality of don't think too hard about it, just do it. It'll be grand. It'll work out. And I'm very grateful that my mother is very, very entrepreneurial. She's a big businesswoman. And my dad is also, but he has a very laid back, horizontal way of thinking of this Irish kind of YOLO, it'll be grand. And that's sort of the thing that I'm learning most with how I work is I love to get things right, but I'm also very much, it's in the hands of whoever it's in right now, and I can do nothing about it and see what happens. So the social media in particular, it's a game. You're just trying, and you will. It's difficult to master, and some people have, and I'm still learning every day how what works for my audience. That's sort of what is after happening now. Is I threw it at the wall, see what stuck, and now I'm learning about my demographics, who my audience are, and what they want. So now I'm thinking a small bit more about that. But at the end of the day, I'm doing what I enjoy. I'm doing what I like, and if I'm not interested in a video I'm producing, then I tell myself, well, nobody else is going to be interested in this either. So I want to make valuable content. So I think the biggest thing for me is, well, if I'm watching a video and I say, well, that's boring, it will be boring to everybody else too. So I think that's where a strength, I'm a very critical person. So that's where a strength in my social media has come through of, I need this to appeal to people. I need it to be quick, educational and entertaining. There's a lot of things that go into social media and you don't see it, unfortunately. People think it's an easy job, and I really wish it was as easy as we thought it was.
Right. Sometimes I spend a half an hour lining up a tweet just the right way, and hashtagging it and putting in the different links. Your TikTok profile is Vivian in NYC. Is that the right title?
That's exactly it. Very basic, straightforward Vivian in NYC. Although Vivian is spelled the French way rather than the American way, I like to say.
Well, we'll include all that in the show notes, but why don't we just take a listen and hear, we'll have the audio of one of your favorite TikTok posts.
Here are 5 famous people you didn't know were Irish American. Number 1, the Great Gatsby's F. Scott Fitzgerald. Well, we should have seen that one coming, shouldn't we? 1896, the famous author was born in Minnesota to an upper middle class Irish family. Number 2, Muhammad Ali. How cool is that? In 2002, they discovered that the great boxing legend has Irish roots. He even travelled to Ennis in County Clare, the hometown of his great-grandfather. Number 3 is famous Hollywood actress Grace Kelly. Born in 1929 in Philly to John Brendan Kelly and Margaret Catherine Kelly. Number 4, John F. Kennedy. Now, you know he's Irish, but if you're young like me, you mightn't know to what extent. Both his grandparents on both sides were Irish. And instead of giving you a number 5, I'm going to give you a quick fire round. Walt Disney, Barack Obama, Bruce Springsteen, Kurt Cobain, and some women, Hollywood's Maureen O'Hara, Judy Garland, Christina Aguilera, Katy Perry, Taylor Swift, and the list goes on.
Vivian, with these posts, you're not only exploring the Irish language and exploring Irish culture, you're exploring New York City as you go. It's a great ticket into all kinds of aspects of New York that maybe you wouldn't normally find yourself in.
That's exactly it. I think you can say a lot of wonderful things about social media and the position I'm thankfully in, but I think the most valuable aspect I've received from the social media are the opportunities and the doors it's opened, and in particular the community it has opened me into and the people that I've met through it as well. They say about New York, it's what you make of it, and it's the people that you're around and the community that you have in New York. And many people will say, oh, I don't enjoy New York and I don't like it. And someone's question will be, well, have you found your people yet? And I think that's the most powerful thing about it, is I love the people, I love the buzz, I love the ambition in the place. And I think that's what drew me to New York in the first place, is I saw, well, everyone there seems to be so ambitious. Your next door neighbor is a billionaire and your other next door neighbor is an Ivy League schooler. And I said, well, if I want to be those people, and if I'm sort of this busybody anyway, which is, Martin, you might be able to agree or disagree here, in Ireland can stand out a little bit. Back at home, I was the ambitious, enthusiastic, hardworking little person, and everyone was like, all right, okay. But in New York, is so normal. It's normal to have 8 million side hustles. It's normal to work from 7 a.m. to 7 a.m. the next day. And that's what it appealed to me so much. So I think it suits my personality, hopefully very well, and hopefully in the long run as well. But the social media has facilitated so many things for me. And as I said, in terms of getting into the Irish community as well, it's the most powerful thing you can do. And it's the most valuable asset and tool that you'll have as a new person in the city or an older person in the city, is your own people.
Well, through your social media work, I'm afraid you have become what is known as an influencer.
Yeah.
Are you entirely comfortable with that title?
As an Irish person, I do absolutely not think anybody can be comfortable with that title. It's very funny. So people will ask me, so Vivian, what do you do? And immediately the first thing that comes into my head is, oh, I must tell them about my TikTok or my Instagram. It's not like my real job comes into my head. That comes at the end of the conversation. Oh, and I have a real job as well. But I often say, oh, I do TikTok. And people are like, well, what do you do on TikTok? Oh, just like a bit of content creation. But even the word influencer, content creation, digital creation, it all sounds pretentious in an Irish accent anyway. So I'm not exactly comfortable with the title, but I'm becoming more and more okay with it.
So it's interesting that you kind of refer to the fact of, let's say, the more hyperactive nature of New York City. And you describe yourself as an ambitious person. When I grew up in Ireland back in the last millennium, to cite yourself as being ambitious or, wanting to do great things and look at this great thing that I've done, the immediate reaction of many people around me at that time in Ireland was, would you look at the head and your man? Getting a bit above himself. He needs to be cut down to size. And this is what struck me when I came to New York was very, very different, was you were expected to trumpet, oh, look, I've done this cool new thing. Let me tell you about it in 10 different ways. And my reaction as an Irish person was like, a bit in love with themselves, aren't they? So talk to me about the balancing issue. I think there is a certain health in being slightly cynical and, not taking yourself too seriously. But on the other hand, if that is dousing all your ambition in Ireland, and I have some theories as to why that exists, talk to me about striking balance and this kind of acceptability of ambition in New York.
I think I'm in a very advantageous position to have this Irish background of don't get ahead of yourself, but also having the fire of New York inside me, let's call it. Because you have the opportunity to ground yourself, but you also have the opportunity to get up on your high horse, as people would say at home, get off your high horse, what people would say to me, inside their head. Mm-hmm. So balancing that, it is a balancing act. And I think it's a balancing act for everybody, anybody from any culture, of any background, because we all like to think we're all self-aware, and we like to, we don't like to come across too up it, or as you'd say. That's what started my TikTok day one, was noticing these cultural differences and learning to adapt to them, and talking about how I'm adapting to these, and if I'm adapting to them, and which ones are a little strange and which ones are a little weird. But my main aim in coming over to New York, I think, was to learn how to communicate and how to portray myself in this, and learn how kind of Americans worked, or let's say New Yorkers worked. So, and that what that ties into is that sort of, I'm a powerful and great, wonderful human being. And that was a little foreign to me coming over. But I think it's something that you learn, but it's something you have to be careful with as well, of course. So I'm still learning. I'd say we're all still learning.
Sinné go agus Captain Goil on tá now teacht chun Gaeilge rá an ish.
Yes.
So a couple of focal for everybody. I think I just butchered the Irish language in about 3 different ways. But tell me about the Irish language. And Irish people refer to the Irish language as Irish. In America, interestingly, a lot of times you'll see it referred to as Gaelic. So talk to me about that whole Irish language experience in New York. Is it surprising?
Absolutely surprising. And I think that's why, as well, back to the TikTok, back to the Instagram, is I said, this is such a unique thing that we're not told about. There are people learning the Irish language outside of Ireland. And it's interesting because I came from a background having gone to an Irish speaking boarding school, but still having the general aura around the language of being sure, why would you want to learn that? There's no point in learning that. It's boring, it's mundane, the classes are rubbish, I'm never going to use it, why would I need it in any job? To then coming here and seeing the enthusiasm and the inspiration that people have for it, this was a new world for me, and I think it's a new world for a lot of people. A fun thing I like to say is being Irish becomes central to your personality when you move over here. It's like back at home, I was, the weird girl who had the plant shop. In Ireland, I'm the Irish girl. And I loved to play into that. When I lived up in Boston, I loved speaking to Irish Americans or those with an Irish background, be it far back or be it their parents or even born in Ireland and having moved over. And I would love talking to them about the Irish language. I always say the Irish language because you're right. When you speak to people in the US and you say, oh, Irish, they look at you like you've 10 heads. Because often you might have to say Irish Gaelic, which I don't enjoy saying too much. But I had so much fun speaking about Irish to people when I lived up in Boston, and people would say, Irish? What's that? And now to come to New York and see this community of people learning Irish and being more enthusiastic about the language than we are at home, I was like, I have to tap into this. I have to tell people at home that it's such like the center of the universe, New York City, the place where, all your dreams come true, as they say, there are people who are interested in who we are, back at home. And we need to show the people back at home. And we also need to show the people in the US, this is who we are now back at home. And to my friends and family and stuff, and say, hey, this is what's happening in the States. It's this amazing, link and tie that I'm hopefully, forming.
Yeah, we had the pleasure of having Monaghan Magan on the podcast last year. And one of the things that Monaghan remarked on was he felt that during actually COVID, that something had shifted in the country, that all of a sudden people were starting to tap back into this. Maybe it was because people were forced to stay in a very confined geographic region. And so they started exploring that region and their roots and their history and their culture and language. You can't really understand any culture without understanding its own language. So we have this oddly vibrant thing going on in New York City with the language, right? Which would be unexpected to Irish people. But do you have any sense that things are also shifting in Ireland? Because all one ever heard for generations was the Irish language is dying out, it's irrelevant. But I think that's actually changing. And I think that's what Monaghan was saying. Does that gel with your own experience?
Absolutely. The feelings towards the language are changing. The environment around the language is changing. Now, I would notice this particularly more within, let's say my generation. So the people in their early 20s, even in their late teens. And that was sort of my aim as well, was sort of trying to contribute to this movement of creating more accessibility around the language, not giving you these professional, wonderful phrases that you can, use if you're an Irish expert. My kind of aim with it was showing, hey, people are still interested in this, creating conversation around it and showing that it's actually in New York as well, like such a cool place for, younger Irish people. Yes, there is a large movement now of people who are not Irish speakers, which is very surprising, and Irish speakers who are you're seeing it in coffee shops. I was in Dublin just 2 or 3 weeks ago, walked into a coffee shop and their entire menu was in Irish. A latte was a latte, but a mocha was in Irish, and milk was banya, and water was ishka, and it was incredible. I put a story up on my Instagram, and the influx of messages that I got, and I said, isn't this fascinating that all I found is just an Irish menu in Irish in the capital of Ireland, and people are like, that is so cool. So there is a mentality shift around it, and I'm hoping that's what I'm trying to aim to do as well, is contribute to that mentality shift of it's not, Irish is not peg sayers, not the peg sayers that you think it is. It's not the dreary, old person thing. It's a new thing that is, as I said earlier, relevant to you. You're seeing it, as I said, you're seeing it in the libraries and the coffee shops, in the universities and classrooms. And now you're seeing it on apparel, you're seeing it on clothing. I have a lovely, really nice jumper, a Gansey, that says Dia Gwit, and it has a little translation underneath telling people that it says hello. And you see it coming into these weird aspects of your life. But that's how we continue to revive the language, is having it in these small little itty bits every single day. And that's my aim with the Instagram and the small short form videos, is to say, hey, you can't speak Irish, but this is what you can do. You can put a signature in your email that says Michel Lamas or Legach da Gui or Mila Buejas or something like that. At the end, that's your little touch of the day. You could send a message to somebody and say Dia Gwit, or you could say slán within a conversation. And a funny thing about the word slán actually is it's said that the American so long is said to come from the Irish slán. So there's interesting fun facts you can bring into your day as well. So yes, there is a mentality shift. There is a shift in, but I think this has weirdly been happening already. It's just coming into light a small bit more now. We're seeing it now.
Well, we had the writer and producer of the Quiet Girl film, which I'll leave to you to say in Irish. And you're starting to hear Irish on the red carpet and at the Oscars. So it's
on Colleen Kuhn. I know it's phenomenal, and coming into the mainstream media, and not only getting people interested in it, but I think my aim at the beginning of my TikTok journey was educating people that there is an Irish language. It would be very entertaining to look back on the early comments on my videos and see a large quantity of messages saying, hey, didn't know this existed. Hey, there's an Irish language. What? And I knew I was doing something good then when I was, at least educating at least 10 people a day that yes, Ireland actually didn't speak English.
Well, you're in New York City and you identified the vibrant Irish culture here, but there's a vibrant culture for almost every nationality on the face of the earth here in New York. What are some of your other experiences? What's blown you away about New York? What are some of the great little unplanned adventures you've had?
Yeah. Oh gosh, that's such a difficult question, because every single day in New York is an unplanned adventure. And I think that's why it's perfect for my little brain that always wants something new. And I think that's where the Irish community have been fantastic. They've been this sort of touch of home. They've been this comfort of home. But there's also this interesting layer of get out of your own community and you'll explore even more. So I've met, I've had relationships and friendships with people from Asia and South Africa and some, Palestinians and especially South Americans as well. And these are just cultures that I've never experienced in Ireland. Even religions as well. I have been to a Maronite mass. I've gone to I'm forgetting all the words now, which is terrible. I have some Jewish friends, so I attended some things with them, some dinners with them. And I think that's being aware of your own culture, but also being aware of everybody else's as well has been the most magical thing about New York is, there's more people than just me in the world. So I couldn't put a pinpoint on one, but one I'm really looking forward to and one I'm really excited for, actually, did forget to mention this, is I'm going on the Metropolitan Opera's Asia tour in June. So I have a friend in the opera and I'm very luckily their +1. So we'll be heading to Korea, where I've never been, and to Taiwan, to Japan, and then back to New York. So I just feel so fortunate, and I understand that these opportunities wouldn't be on my doorstep without the TikTok, without the Instagram, without the Irish community, and without New York. So
that sounds like a fantastic trip. I've been to Korea, and I think the Irish and the Koreans match up very well. I think there's a sort of a natural kinship there. So, and besides, my name Lee is one of the most popular names in Korea. It's like 20% of all people are named Lee. Vivian, so you've conquered the city here, or at least you haven't let it beat you down. What would you advise somebody, a young person from Ireland, looking to come to the U.S., New York in particular? Would you have any advice for them?
Yes, I'm giving advice every single day. Actually, I'm actually on a program here called the Mountbatten program, and it makes Irish people go, "Wait, what?" Because they place people in New York with a host organization with free accommodation. You get your healthcare, and you also get your visa administration from 12 to 18 months. So it's kind of a version of the J1 graduate visa that a lot of students, poor students, are on in the city. It's a very difficult visa to be on. So I have a lot of people contacting me about this wonderful resource, the Mountbatten program. And they're like looking for advice when they first come. You know, there's about 40 of us on the program now. You have to go through 5 or 6 interviews to get in and get your job or your host organization as well. And my biggest, the main thing I always say, and the first thing I always say, is never say no to anything. New York will hand you so many things. When you're here, and when you're here at the beginning of your journey, say yes to everything. You have no idea where you're going to end up. You have no idea who you'll meet. You will meet famous people. You will end up in a room with some of the richest people in the world. You'll just won't know who you are if you say yes to everything. And I promised myself I would do that when I moved to New York, and it has ended me up in the position, the very grateful position I am in right now. So say yes to everything, and also find your own community, join the Irish networks, go to the weird networking things that you never thought you'd go to. But it'll pay off, and it eventually does. So that's all I can say is I love relationships and meeting new people and being in touch with people. So I'm always going to be like, my advice, find new people.
Vivian, I pretty much line up with your idea of say yes to everything. And you're taking me back to when I first moved into New York. And, I was just out all the time. Although I will admit there are a few times I wish I said no.
Yes, there's always a few, but a story to tell. As I say every day, when I was young, someone told me, they're like, Vivian, you should write a book. And I was like, wait, what? And now that silly little thought is still in my head. But every time something weird happens, every time I have a dreadful day, or anytime I have a wonderful day, I say, that's going to be a good chapter in my book now.
So, unfortunately, we're getting to that point in our podcast where we're going to draw things to a close, but we have to introduce another character into our room here by the name of Seamus Plug. And this is your opportunity to advocate on behalf of something that has your support, attention, or gra, to use an Irish word. So tell us about your Seamus Plug, Vivian Sayers O'Callaghan. Well,
of course. I guess I might just mention, I mentioned my Instagram and my TikTok a lot. So you'll find me at Vivian _in _NYC. Very straightforward, very basic, but I should probably change it at some point. But my plug at the moment is I am doing my best to kind of spread out my time evenly and sort of cater to a lot of different aspects of the Irish language and cater to lots of different people. So I've actually just started a Patreon, which I'm really excited about. So if you are looking for, phrases for, very recently I had a request for phrases for a wedding speech. I would love a wedding speech in Irish. So people came to my Patreon, they signed up, and we had kind of a one-on-one video call with each other. And we said, what would you like? Okay, I'll do these translations for you. So if you're looking for, a deep dive into your kind of family, background, or you want to know things about Ireland, you want to know things about the Irish language, or you just simply want a translation, or you just want to chat, I do have a Patreon, and I'm delighted to set aside some time and kind of help people out with any questions that you might have.
And so with that kind offer, on behalf of myself and John and our listeners, I'd like to say thank you to Vivian Sayers O'Callaghan for coming on and telling a little bit about her story. her experiences in New York, her Irish language journey. We will put in the show notes all the relevant links so you can follow Vivian on social media. And we look forward to hearing more of your adventures at some point in the future. So thank you so much.
Gormil Mahagat.
Or I should have said, Gormil Mahagat.
I would fit it in.
Well, Martin, not difficult to go for a little alliteration here. Viv is vibrant. That's the word that pops up for me. She's an entrepreneur, social media sensation, Irish culture and language advocate, taking New York by storm. And, oh yes, she even has time to be a classical music conductor.
Yeah, no lack of energy there. It makes me feel somewhat sluggish. But in truth, Vivian's story resonated with me in a slightly different way, because to some degree we both got our start in the plant world. And she started off with prickly plants, and it says a lot about her. Young woman, not even out of college, and setting up a business and selling plants through Instagram. And sometimes you start off in one place and you end up in another. And so now she has fallen into that category of social media influencer, although I'm not sure she quite sees herself in that way, even though she's very adept.
Yeah, I think maybe a content creator, Martin, that might be how she sees herself. And hey, right as we're recording this, she's creating content in Korea. Viv is on the move.
Irish Stew is produced by John Lee, Martin Nutty, and Bill Schultz. Editing, mixing, and mastering by Bill Schultz. Music on Irish Stew was composed and performed by Rosa Nutty, with Donald Bowens on drums, Cathal O'Riordan on bass and synthesizer. For more on Rosa Nutty's music, please visit rosanutty.com.